and others. What up, good people and others? I'm on another late night live, but I got part two for y'all. So this is Hold On to Your Blessings, part two. And I thought I was gonna be able to do this in the dark, but I can't. I can't see in the dark. But anyway, we're gonna be coming from Exodus 2:1 through 10, and is looking at the birth of Moses. So this is part two of Hold On to Your Blessings, and it's called Drawn Out of the Water. Drawn Out of the Water. Now, when I first had this section of scripture in mind, I actually had a different title for it, and it was Alligators at the Gate. Alligators at the Gate. And when it first kind of hit my spirit, it was more so dealing with the fact that, um, of course, babies or children being a blessing. And we know right now that a lot is going on as far as the exposure of what a lot of wicked individuals partook in when it comes to um, just different types of perverse and wicked things that they were doing and may still be doing with people's children. And so it's interesting when you look at the story of Moses, right? Before Moses was born, when you look at Exodus 1 and 22, Pharaoh had given a decree, he had given an order, a law, to where all male children were supposed to be thrown into the Nile River. And I'm not sure when you were born, but there was a movie about the story of Moses, and I believe it was called Prince of Egypt. And I want to say in the movie, I felt like there were alligators in there. I don't know. It may not have been alligators in the movie, but alligators at the gate was what came to mind because for some reason I felt like I saw alligators in the water when they had put Moses in the basket and he was floating down the river in that movie. But if you haven't seen Prince of Egypt, I wouldn't necessarily tell you to go watch it today, only because I wouldn't. But it was a good movie. I used to have a movie. But either way, let's carry on. So, hey everybody. So when we look at Exodus 2 and 2, right? We skip Exodus 1, but we look at Exodus 2 and 2, and this is when Moses' mom realized that um, Moses was a goodly child, right? So it's I wrote is when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And so the Strongs I have did not have goodly in it. It told me to check the appendix. It wasn't in the appendix. I mean, it was in the appendix, but it didn't give any definition. So when I looked up goodly online in Strong, it talks about Shapar is the word. It's number 8231, and it means to be beautiful. Hey everyone, it means to also be fair or to be pleasing. So when Moses' mom saw him, even though she knew that she was supposed to send him up the river, right, throw him in the river, she saw that he was beautiful, saw that he was fair, saw that he was pleasing, and so she kept him and ended up hiding him for 3 months just to avoid sending him in the river and having him killed, right? So what I took from that was the good things are hidden. We know that in the word, God at times hides certain things or certain people, right? He keeps them hidden and out the way. In other words, he keeps them separate, okay? And so Moses was put up for 3 months. Again, he was considered a goodly child. What I also noted from that is that the good things are worth the risk and sacrifice. There was a law out, and Moses' mom was supposed to throw him in this river, right? Because they wanted to get rid of all of the male children. Pharaoh wanted to get rid of all of the male children. And instead of obeying the law of getting rid of her child, right? Getting rid of her blessing, right? Kids are blessings from God. Instead of getting rid of her blessing, she held on to it and she hid it for 3 months, okay? So when we go forward and we look at Exodus 2, what I noted, I mean, Exodus 2 and 3, excuse me, that before she decided that she could no longer hide Moses, or when she decided that she could no longer hide Moses, then she took it upon herself to make an ark, right, to cover him. So she wanted to ensure that he was covered securely within the ark she built for him. And so what I took from that, right, when it comes to holding on to your blessing, is that you have to ensure your blessing is secured before departure. You have to secure, you have to ensure, excuse me, your blessing is secured before departure. So Moses' mom went the extra mile. She built him this ark to sit him in before she decided she was going to send him up the river, right? So it was also interesting what I took from this, right, is Moses' mom placed him securely in the exact place that was supposed to take him out. So mind you, um, when we look at the river, right, throughout this section of scripture, when we look at Exodus 2, 1 through 10, there were multiple uses that the river had in this passage. But the very first usage, if we look at Exodus 1 and 22, is that the river was supposed to kill the babies, right? So we have death, we have murder. The river was supposed to kill the children. But then we see also where when Moses' mom placed him in the ark, the river bank ends up becoming a cover for Moses because she sat him in the basket at the basically on the river bank. And so she placed him in the exact spot still that Pharaoh told her to put the babies, but she did it securely and it didn't take him out, okay? So when we go forward and we look at Exodus 2 and 4, we see that Moses' sister keeps a distant eye on him. So Moses was always covered, but his sister kept a distant eye on him. So when Pharaoh's daughter goes to wash herself at the river, there's something else that the river was used for, right? Washing. When we look at Exodus 2 and 5, she discovers the ark. She inspects it when we go into Exodus 2 and 6, Exodus 2 and 6, and she realizes that there's a child in it. But she also notes that it's not any kind of child, right? It's a Hebrew baby. So what I took from that is that, one, she could have known it was a Hebrew baby because of the decree that her father had given for all of the Hebrew mothers to throw the male children in the rivers, right? So it could have been because of the decree that she knew that Moses was a Hebrew baby, or there could have been something distinct or something that looked different about Moses from the Egyptians, or just that there was a uniqueness to him, right? And where I got that from was when we go back to Exodus 2 and 2, it talks about Moses being a goodly child. So even in the description of the type of child or who he was, the description itself is unique. This made me think about the book of Enoch, where it talks about how they were describing Noah. And there was a distinct description when it came to how the book of Enoch describes Noah. But it's also interesting that there's a distinct description describing Moses. And so we know that when it comes to children of God, or even the people that God uses, there's something unique about them, right? There's something different about them. We saw that briefly when I highlighted there was a difference in the lifestyle of the Israelites when we look at Ezra 4. The lifestyle of God's children, or the Israelites, there was something that stood out about it in comparison to the Romans, or to the people and culture of that time, right? How God's children lived, there was something different about it. When we go on and we look at Exodus 2 and 7, Moses' sister ends up being the maiden for Pharaoh's daughter. And that tickled me because I believe when I read this before, I'm not sure if I caught that or not, but we see in Exodus 2 or 7, it says, "Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" I thought this was very interesting, especially when it comes to holding onto your blessing, right? Pharaoh's maiden was Moses' sister. So she ends up being perfectly positioned to ensure that Moses was secure or not, right? Because Pharaoh's daughter could have found Moses and she could have been like, you know what, take him out the basket, just throw him in the river and let him drown or die, right? But what happens is Pharaoh's daughter ends up seeing Moses and she has compassion on him. So she decides that she wants to keep the baby. But Moses' sister was perfectly positioned, kind of just like Esther, right? Esther was perfectly positioned to be used when she needed to be used to help the other Hebrews. And that, ironically, which is funny enough, what happens with Moses' future, right? He ends up being perfectly positioned as well to be used by God for the Israelites in the future. And so I thought that was very interesting. I love how that kind of played out in the scripture. When we go further on and we look at Exodus 2 8 through 9, um, Moses' sister is given the green light to go find a nurse for Moses. The nurse ends up being Moses' mom. Why? Because the sister was the maiden, and so the sister therefore knew that the mom would be able to nurse her son. So even though the mom took the risk of keeping Moses, right? She hid Moses for the 3 months and she ensured that he was securely protected in the ark before she um, departed from him. But the way God works, God still turned it around to where she was still able to nurse and care for her child. So even though she ends up departing from him or giving him away, he ends up in the hands of Pharaoh's daughter, who then turns around and finds a Hebrew nurse, and that nurse ends up being Moses' mom. And so, not only was she able to still care and still care and nurse Moses, she was then given a wage to do so. Now, isn't that kind of ironic? Because in today's time, at least in the U.S., there were gosh, what was it? There was, I don't know the exact thing, so maybe I'm not going to fully talk about it because I can't. I don't remember the exact thing. This just came to me as I was talking. But I know there was some type of incentive for moms and their kids, right? That was given by the president. I almost had a, a verbal type of. Anyway, Father. Ah, oh man. Anyways, so uh she is able to keep her baby essentially, and she's also given an incentive. She's ended up giving a wage to provide for the baby. That sounds familiar, right? Pharaoh's daughter was paying the mom to care for her baby. I know there were some interesting people. I'm going to say some wicked people, just seeing what they birthed, but that were saying more of us needed to have children. Anyway, and then there was an incentive that came out for the moms. Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, they all kind of, anyway. And so I thought that was pretty cool. So his mother was also comforted because she was able to stay in close proximity to her child. God ends up covering them both. So then when we go to the final verse of this section talking about Moses' birth, which is Exodus 2 and 10, Pharaoh's daughter names him. So I've been calling him Moses the whole time, but he didn't get the name Moses until Exodus 2 and 10. And so she names him, and the name that she gives him fits his circumstance. So she names him based off of how she finds him. And she names him Moses, which means to draw out in Hebrew, but it also from what I looked up briefly, it also means son in Greek. So Moses becomes her son once he has reached, I guess, a certain age or health status. After being nursed by his mom, he then becomes the son to Pharaoh's daughter. And so I thought that was pretty neat. So also because later on, what Moses does with the Israelites is he parts the Red Sea. So he's still dealing with water. I thought that was pretty interesting. So anyway, the biggest takeaway from part two of hold on to your blessings, right? Drawn out of the water, is your blessings are worth the risk of holding on to. Had Moses' mom decided that she was not going to keep Moses, that once she realized it was a male, she would have just thrown him in the river, let him go, and let nature take its course, right? But she decided that Moses, being a child and knowing that he was a blessing, she didn't abort her blessing. She didn't decide that she was going to give it away uh, for adoption until a little later on, right? Because she did end up giving her child up for adoption. So she did do that. But she held on to him as long as she could, right? She held on to her blessing as long as she could. And because she ended up doing so, God still turned around and said, "Here, I'm a place you in such a position to where you're still able to take care of him or raise him up into a certain age, and then he's going to become the son of Pharaoh's daughter." And so it's imperative for us to hold on to our blessings. There might be all types of incentives that might be thrown out to the moms, to the fathers to not be in the home, to the fathers to become more feminine, to the women to be hardened hearted, or whatever the case may be, right? But your blessings are worth the risk of holding on to. We know that with so much stuff being exposed as far as like the different wicked things that have been done to kids and these different cults and everything else that's been exposed, we know that they use the kids for wickedness, right? But had Moses' mom not decided that he wasn't worth the risk of holding on to, basically disobeying Pharaoh, there would have never been a person that was able to free the Israelites. Or I won't say never, because we know how God is, but it wouldn't have been Moses, right? It probably wouldn't have also been the same impact, right? Because we know that we're all uniquely different. So we bring different uniqueness, we bring different skills, we bring different gifts to the table to be utilized for God's purpose. I was going to say if you're serving on God's, but we know God uses the good and the bad. So whatever the case may be. But, right, your blessings are worth holding on to, okay? So they're worth the risk of holding on to. And that is the message for part two of Hold On to Your Blessings. Hold on to your blessings, drawn out of the water. This came from Exodus 2, 1 through 10. I will catch y'all later. Hopefully have an amazing night. Thanks to everybody that tuned in and commented. I'll catch y'all later. Peace out.